Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, salam, wherever you're joining us from. Hello to all of you. Welcome to MACFEST 2026. We're saying hello from India, from the UK, and from France. So please don't be shy. Say hello in the chat. Tell us where you're watching us from. From our whole panel and the MACFEST team, we're wishing you all Ramadan Mubarak, Ramadan Kareem. We are at the moment in the middle of our Ramadan festival. This is the second event, and the second event on MACFEST 2026 is another fabulous feast. And our host for today is our wonderful Shamim Choudhury, a British Bangladeshi international journalist with more than 20 years experience in television, print, and radio. She has worked with Al Jazeera, English, TRT World, AP, and NPR, and most recently she was in Bangladesh reporting on the country's historical actions. She has also moderated MACFEST panels in the past, so some of you might recognize her. And before I hand over to Shamim, I just wanted to remind everybody that MACFEST is really hoping for some more donations, as little as £1. You can do it through MACFEST website. Our event is recorded, so if you would like to watch it again, after, let's say, a couple of days after we go over the recording and do the necessary edits, we will put it on MACFEST YouTube channel, which you can find when you go on MACFEST website, scroll down to the YouTube icon. And do send your comments in the chat, ask questions, share your thoughts. We do want to engage in conversation with you. So over to you, Shamim.
Thank you, Katarina, for the lovely introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from all across the world. Assalamu alaikum, Ramadan Kareem, and welcome to MACFEST 2026. I am so excited to be part of another 6 months of this internationally acclaimed, multi-award-winning celebration of Muslim arts and culture, held across venues in Northwest England and streamed online to a global audience. For those of you who don't know, MACFEST showcases some of the most talented creatives who have some kind of connection to the Muslim world, and they include artists, musicians, historians, photographers, and many, many others. Like every year, this year we've got more than 80 events, some of them in person and others, like this one, online. And for those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. We're delighted to have you with us. As Katarina said, my name is Shamim Choudhury, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour and a half. I am absolutely thrilled to be joined once again by the academic historian and author, Professor Siobhan Lambert-Hurley, and also by the chef, food writer, and Indian MasterChef contestant, Sadaf Hussain. Now, we're going to be discussing the wonderfully engaging and informative book, Forgotten Foods, Memories and Recipes from Muslim South Asia. Particularly poignant as it's Ramadan. Many of us are fasting. There she is. Siobhan is holding the book up. And it is, I've read parts of it, and it is, I can assure you, and so I'm holding a copy up as well. This is great for our audience to see what it looks like. It's a truly wonderful book. I will tell you a little bit about the book in a bit, but I want to first properly introduce our distinguished guest. Now, Siobhan's area of expertise is global history at the University of Sheffield. She specialises in women, gender and Islam in South Asia. I was chatting to Siobhan just before this session began, and she does a wonderful service to Muslim women from the region, helping to rewrite the narrative that we have had thrust upon us against without any kind of agency for so long. She is making steps to change the way that South Asian Muslim women are perceived around the world. She does us a massive, massive service, so we are very, very grateful for all the work that she does. Now, Siobhan completed her BA in Asian Studies at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver and her PhD in History at the School of Oriental and African Studies here in London. She's written many papers and also several books, and she's something of a regular at MACFEST these days. Last year, we had a wonderful session where we discussed her remarkable book, Muslim Women, Reform and Princely Patronage, looking at the leadership roles of Muslim women in the Mosul area in what is now India. Siobhan, welcome back. We are also delighted to have with us Sadat Hussain, who, as I mentioned, is an author, chef and food writer, and whose work he describes as sitting on the intersection of food, culture, anthropology and memory. He was a finalist on MasterChef India in 2016. He is the co-host of the award-winning podcast Naan Curry, and his latest book, Masala Mandi, is a deep dive into India's spice traditions, looking at over 450 regional blends. He's contributed as a researcher to Forgotten Food of Rampur, which is a project that was commissioned by the University of Sheffield. So as Siobhan, a multi-talented person, is amongst our midst, and we are very, very honoured to have you here. Siobhan Sadat, it's an absolute pleasure to be speaking to you today. Now, a little bit about today's session. Katarzyna has mentioned it, but just to reiterate, it's going to last for about an hour and a half. In the first hour, we will hear from Siobhan and Sadat, and then we will take questions. So as usual, we really want these sessions to be interactive. So everyone who is tuning in today, please share your thoughts and questions in the chat. I'll try to get through as many as I possibly can. So please don't be shy. Let us know what part of the world you're tuning in from. Often we have people as far afield, ranging from the US to all the way to Indonesia, and it's always a delight to hear from you. So do make sure to let us know. Even if you don't have a question, if you just want to make an observation, if you just want to say hello, please do that. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. A little bit about the book. Forgotten Foods, Memories and Recipes from Muslim South Asia is a wonderful collection of essays, recipes, anecdotes, and reflections. It's edited by Siobhan and also Tara Hussain Khan and Claire Chambers, and all three have written a preface in the book. It was published in 2023 in India by an imprint of Macmillan. What is unique about this book, this feature about this book, and of course Siobhan and Sadat will expand and explain it properly, but just to summarize, just to give you a sense, it is the interaction between food, history, and culture. It brings together academics, historians, cooks, street vendors, and heritage practitioners that give it a truly unique feel, divided into 4 sections, which no doubt our esteemed guests will go into. But I will just say, and this bit for me was just wonderful when I read it, each chapter has a recipe, and that's what really brings the book to life. Enough from me. Let's hear from Siobhan and Sadat. Siobhan, I'm going to start with you. I've touched on this, but what would you say is distinct about the book, and how did it come about?
Thanks for that, Shamim, and thank you for the very warm welcome today as well, and very generous introduction. Just before I get started, let me just say a huge thank you to the whole MACFEST team, particularly Kesra, who has invited me once again to participate. It's always a joy to be part of MACFEST, and I'm really excited today to be talking about this book, to which Sadat, my co-presenter, has contributed as well. You may be able to tell I have a slight cold, so please forgive me if I'm snuffling a bit and I have a bit of a funny voice today too. But yeah, let me get into your question, Shamim. So this book, Forgotten Foods, is one that's really close to my heart, actually. It emerged out of a project that I led starting in 2019. And that was a project called Forgotten Foods. So that's where the title comes from. But that project was really distinct. It was an academic project. It was funded by a special fund called the Global Challenges Research Fund. And what that meant was it was a little bit different than what we normally do as academics. As a historian, it's kind of my usual practice that I'm in the archive, I'm writing academic papers, I'm writing books, which are more kind of academically oriented. But this particular fund, the GCRF, it was called for short, was really about using academic research, including the work of historians, to, as it put it, improve lives and opportunities, particularly by addressing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so it had a kind of different feel to it. It was very much more publicly oriented. It was about collaboration. It was about thinking about how we can take what we do as historians, as academics, and kind of bringing it out to a wider public. So the project was really about, as I say, kind of building collaborations within the academy. So bringing historians together with other academics. We worked with an amazing array in the course of this project. So my co-editor, Claire Chambers, for instance, is a literature specialist. We also worked with plant scientists. We don't do that very often as historians, and a variety of other academics too. But then we also worked with public practitioners. So it was a real chance to work with this huge array that Shamim mentioned already. So as part of our team, we had heritage practitioners, as was indicated, chefs like Sadaf, but we also worked with filmmakers and street vendors and just a whole array of different people. So it was really about kind of working together, thinking about the different specialisms and expertise that we could all kind of literally bring to the table. And then thinking about how we could use that to share our knowledge and expertise with the widest possible audience. And that's really what this book was about. So we had our project, you'll see the dates are significant here. Our project began in autumn of 2019. So right before the pandemic, but we didn't know that was coming, of course. And we had our first meeting in Allahabad in northern India at that time. And when we all got together, this huge array of kind of different people with different expertise, the first thing we thought about was how do we kind of bring together our knowledge, bring together our expertise and share it with as many people as we could, basically. And so our first kind of thought was that we would put together a kind of column, a public column, maybe in a newspaper or a magazine. We thought about doing it in Hindi. We thought about doing it in English. And ultimately, this ended up being a column for an online newspaper, a fearless online newspaper called Scroll in India. And the idea was that we were going to kind of do like monthly columns on this theme of forgotten food. And we were just in the process of kind of planning that when the pandemic intervened. And suddenly everything, of course, was kind of thrown up in the air. But what became clear after things sort of settled a little bit was that actually the pandemic was an amazing time to be working and thinking about food. You'll all probably remember how this became such an exciting time for kind of thinking about how you could share recipes via WhatsApp groups. Some of you might remember the banana bread craze that we had in various places. And basically, I think what we found is that people became quite sort of nostalgic, I guess, for a time when things were a little bit more steady, and food became a kind of way of getting there. It also became at that time a way that you could kind of travel to other places through your taste buds, even when you couldn't necessarily leave your home. So we started publishing this column in Scroll, and we published it for over a year, I think. In that time, we commissioned pieces that came from a whole different array of contributors. So some of our pieces were written by more kind of public history authors. So actually the first piece that we commissioned was contributed by a very well-known author in India, Rana Safi, who may be familiar to some of you. She wrote a beautiful piece, which is part of this book as well, where she talks about the breakfasts of her childhood in a really evocative way. And she talked about specifically about these Ovid specialties of rogini roti and aloo ki katli, and she includes those recipes at the end of her chapter, as Shamim was indicating before. So we had some contributors like that. We also had chefs like Sadaf, who wrote a beautiful ode to street vendors at a time when, of course, our streets were being emptied of people like that. And everybody else for that matter. We also had heritage practitioners, academics. And then a final thing we did is we sort of thought of it as a way of archiving stories. So we approached certain people who we thought could kind of, sort of people we might have normally done oral history with, but we used it as a way of kind of sharing those and archiving those stories more widely. So one person that we asked to contribute was a woman called Moniza Hashmi, who's based in Lahore, and who is the daughter of the very well-known poet Faiz Ahmed Faiz, who will be undoubtedly familiar to many of you. And we asked her just to write a piece, what was it like growing up with this great poet, and what were mealtimes like? What were the things discussed around the table? So she wrote a lovely paper a piece where she wrote about her food memories of her father. That's included in the book, of course. We also asked a woman called Muniza Shamsi, who is a literature specialist based in Karachi, who wrote a 3-part series about kind of growing up between Rampur in North India, Karachi, and London. So we began kind of creating our own archive through this scroll column. And that became so popular, we couldn't believe how widely those pieces circulated. And we'd already done a book in the midst of the pandemic called Desi Delicacies as part of the project. And that was published with Pan Macmillan. And so they kind of latched on to these pieces that we did as part of this column. We had an amazing editor there, Tista Guhasarkar. She encouraged us to gather the pieces that had been in the column, but also commission a whole bunch of new ones. And that's what we did. We pulled all those together. We really thought very carefully. You asked me, Shamim, what distinguishes this book. When we were pulling together and commissioning those pieces, we were really thinking about how we could get a sense of Muslim food, if you like, across a wide social spectrum, for one. So we wanted to get an idea, not just of the kind of really rich, fancy recipes that one might find in a royal household, for instance, but we also wanted to think about the labor, really, that sustains that. So who are the people, and what are the stories of those who are maybe making those very rich, wealthy meals, but also, who are creating a different kind of cuisine in very different circumstances, maybe out of starvation or scarcity as well. And then we also were very attentive to getting as wide a kind of regional spread as we could. So in our book, Desi Delicacies, which was edited by Claire Chambers, we had made sure that we had representatives from Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. But we found that there were sort of gaps. We wanted to include more from like the south of India. We wanted to include some more stories from the northeast. And really kind of give us, really diversify and complicate in a way the perception of what food from Muslim South Asia was. So the idea, it's not just kebab and biryani, there's a lot of other possibilities as well. So yeah, that was kind of the thinking and the story behind the book, and also hopefully gives you just a little bit of a sense of what sets it apart.
Thank you. Much to in South Asia than just come to you. How did you live, and what was
Shamima? We're having a problem with the
breaking up a bit.
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. All right. The joys of technology. I'm gonna I'm going to start again. I was just thanking Siobhan and saying she's so right that there's so much more to Muslim South Asian cuisine than biryani and kebab. And you've really given us a sense of how involved, the food is. And it's fascinating to hear how it evolved. So I want to ask you, how did you get involved and what was it about this book that appealed to you?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, MACFEST. This is my first time. And when Siobhan mentioned about the event, I'm like, yeah, let's go and let's do this. So thank you. Thank you, Reza. Thank you, everyone. Also, thank you, people who have joined at different time zones. I don't know what time it is for everyone in their local clocks. The exciting part of joining this particular project was not just that, oh, it's going to be just another project, but for me, it became what I think Siobhan also mentioned, like a conference of different kinds of people who are interested in food. And that sums up on the kinds of people we have got, what Shamim, you also mentioned, be it practitioners, the chefs, the writers, those who are just excited about food and want to narrate those stories. And the good old saying, right? The food connects people. And that's what I think the beautiful part about both the volumes been, in fact, the entire project itself. And that's why I sort of got excited. And personally, beyond the book, I think for me, the excited part was to sort of try out these forgotten or lesser known dishes that I think I would have not tried otherwise, or you will have these dishes somewhere dying out. But projects like this really sort of rallied the entire thing. One thing that Siobhan mentioned, that there was such a high demand, and I am here, and I would confirm that there was such a high demand within a bunch of shops that I know of. And every time when I would go, they would, even now, you would see these books on the shelf. And when I'm saying even now, it's been 23, now this is the third year, you would still see these books right in front, not the back, right in front, for people to sort of still go and pick up. And the authors would still talk about, or the shopkeepers would still talk about that. Can we have that book? So yes, so people were really interested in reading their stories. There was some real honesty in just writing the story, and for different people. Sure, there's the stories of kebab. Sure, there's stories of biryani as well. But what Siobhan mentioned, and which I always say, that Muslim food is not just about kebabs and biryanis. That we don't sleep with biryani and wake up with kebabs. There's so much more. A basic okra, right? That's also what Muslims eat. And a book like this talks that great thing. And in fact, one of the chapters that I did for the book and also for Scroll magazine was on samosa. That how samosa and chai, both of these things are not desi in that sense, Indian in that sense. However, every community enjoys these two things, and it doesn't have an identity. That samosa doesn't have an identity, whether it's a Muslim food or non-Muslim food, but everybody eats it and nobody questions that. So my thought was that I want to narrate those kind of stories from both the food writer and as a practitioner, as chef practitioner in that sense, is to try out something which is different, try out something which is what we have heard time and again. Everybody's talked about it, everybody's written about it, but what more is there for people to sort of savor onto? And that was my the aha moment with the entire project itself. Yeah.
That's great, Siobhan. I want to thank you for that. Siobhan, I just want to go back to something that you mentioned. By the way, we're getting lots of comments, which is wonderful, and lots of people saying hello. So do keep interacting with us. And once we've finished this kind of question and answer session, I will make sure that I will get to as many of you as I can. So it's great to see that we're getting a lot of interaction during this session. Siobhan, you mentioned that it started off as a scroll column. What kind of reception? Did you get much feedback from readers? And if so, what kind of feedback did you get? And was there any particular recipes that was most popular with the readers? Can you tell us about those recipes?
That's a great question, Shamim. So as I mentioned, the some of the initial columns, not all of the chapters that are in the book, but if about 12 or so of the original pieces were first published online in Scroll. And even though we didn't get much feedback through Scroll itself, a lot of them were shared very widely on the internet, obviously, via social media and that kind of thing. Yeah, a real interest in the recipes there. I think the ones that, looking at the kind of book as a whole, the ones that have really attracted a lot of interest are the ones that we had from some of the kind of border regions of South Asia. So I mentioned that we have one chapter which focuses on Manipur up in the northeast. And there, have such a very different kind of food culture, a lot of fermentation, a lot of different kinds of ingredients like dried fish paste, and shrimp paste, these kind of things. So those were sort of there was a little surprise, let's say, at those kind of things. There's also a lovely piece which focuses on Ladakh, up in the very kind of north in the Himalaya. Again, a very different kind of food culture than maybe many people associate necessarily with Muslim South Asia. There's also some pieces, there's one piece that looks at eggs in Kerala, in the Moppala region of Kerala, and another piece which focuses on a specific kind of achar made by the Malay Muslim community in Sri Lanka. So all of those recipes kind of garnered a lot of surprise and a lot of attention. At the same time, I would say that there was, some of the ones that are probably kind of a little bit more well known, but which were, all of the recipes in this book are either heirloom or heritage recipes. So many of them were, family recipes, some going back. I mean, I was just reminding myself about one of them this morning, and there's a lovely recipe in there for a keema karela with mincemeat and the bitter gourd vegetable. And it's noted by the author that this was a recipe that had belonged to her paternal aunt, who had long since passed, but who had passed this recipe down and came to her through her cousins. And she reckoned it was at least 70 years old and had only been passed down through oral communication. So I think there was a particular interest in some of those recipes that kind of had that flavor of home, I suppose, and the flavor of families. So definitely one of the ones that I know has been a favorite is there's a chapter by a journalist in London called Alia Nazki, and she contributes a recipe for Rogan Josh, which will be a favorite Kashmiri recipe, but also was definitely a favorite with our readers as well.
So everybody loves the Rogan Josh, myself included. Yeah. All of this talk of food is making me very hungry. It's particularly pertinent that it's Ramadan and some of us have to wait a few more hours before we can indulge. But I just want to ask you, you mentioned something very interesting. You said that samosa doesn't have an identity. Now, you obviously live in India. It seems to me that food in South Asia has a way of connecting people of different backgrounds, regardless of ethnicity, religion, in a way that other things can't. And it goes against, perhaps some of this divisive narrative that we might be hearing from time to time. Is that your experience of food culture in India? Do you find that it does connect people in a way that perhaps other things can't? And how is that reflected in the book?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm saying samosa is not Indian, of course, but the one that we eat is very Indian. It's the one with potato, which travel to Africa and all. But the one that we eat right now, I think Ramadan, for me, and that's what I also talked about in the book as well. For Ramadan, iftar for me is always about keema samosa. It'll be always minced meat in that pastry and then deep fried, which is called samosa, sambusak, samsa, whatever you are familiar with. So that's one aspect of it. However, so And over the period, of course, it has lost its quote unquote identity, whatever it is, right? At some point, this was on the tables of the royal folks. However, right now, it's the most common street food. And I would call it a street snack. I would call it morning to evening. It's always available. You pick up a cup of tea, and then you have samosa to go with. Sometimes, of course, you'll have the biscuits and other things, but mostly it is this deep fried thing, which is a quick snack, quick meal for most of people sitting at home or daily wage earners, right? So it's a quick meal for them. There's carb, there's fat, which is fried and perfect for a good meal, as I said. Now, the second part of your question is interesting, that how, with the divisive politics, how what's happening. Um, Interestingly, a lot of things that we see on TV versus what's happening on ground itself. On ground, you would see Ramadan is a month where if you travel within the country itself, the smaller parts of the various cities, be it Delhi or Lucknow or various other places, you would see, irrespective of whatever your religion is, you would like to go out and celebrate the festival with the community itself. So it is very interesting to see that how everyone pretty much are interested, irrespective of their religion, their belief, whether they believe they, even including the Muslims as well, whether they fast or not. That's besides the point. The point is that you go out to eat and celebrate with the community itself. People don't ask whom they are serving, for sure. In fact, day before I was in old Delhi, so Delhi's older town. I was taking four friends of mine. One of them, and none of them were Muslims, to be honest. And yet, all of them just wanted to see what's the hype about. It's the same food, however, but it's the way it just brings people together. Sometimes, of course, you hear about fights happening over the food. I do believe that food has both the power. One, to bring people together, unite them, and also it's the lowest denomination that you hold to control the society. So it goes both ways. But as I said, for Ramazan, I think it's beautiful that how people come together, host as well. So as I was mentioning earlier as well, that I have a bunch of people. None of them are Muslims. A bunch of them are not even believers of any religion. And then we are having iftar. And it's the idea is both. The idea is to have the celebration, but the idea is also when you serve food inside your house, it's more about friends, family coming together. And when you do it outside, it's about just looking at the magnanimity, the theater of the food in this festival. So I think it's beautiful that it brings people together instead of always having this divisive news that we keep hearing.
Yeah, I think many people will be able to relate with everything that you've said. I think most of us have had experiences of how food can, it's such a powerful force in bringing people together. And I might add that there are few pleasures in life greater than a samosa and a cup of chai. I find it very difficult to find. And I've just come back from Bangladesh, and our version of samosas are shingaras. They're pyramid shaped and filled with potato. And I was telling Siobhan earlier that I spent many an hour in Bangladesh gorging on shingaras and masala chai, and it was absolutely delightful. Siobhan, you did mention the pandemic, and I would love it if you could just expand on it just a little bit, because we all went through the pandemic. It was a really, really tough time for so many of us, and you were, trying to get this book working, completed in this very difficult time. I mean, how did that impact you? I mean, did the pandemic in some ways work in your favor? You mentioned that people were drawn towards recipes and food related material. Did that help you?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think when we were doing this project, it felt, at the time, it felt like, as it did in many other ways, quite disastrous for us, in that we had a lot of the project was meant to be very publicly oriented, and we envisaged doing kind of a lot of, themes in activities in public spaces. So, a big part of the project, for instance, was that we were going to run 3 big oral history projects where we were going to be kind of capturing people's memories of food over kind of long periods of time. And of course, everything kind of came to a kind of standstill. But actually, one of the amazing things was it really forced us to to think, okay, well, how can we do this differently? How can we be creative about what we're doing? Are there other ways that we can reach a public? And you might have noticed from some of the examples I've given already that, one thing that really became clear was that if we moved into a digital space, that the digital, of course, crosses borders. And you'll know as much as anyone how bloody the borders of South Asia can be. So it really enabled us to kind of use food to start conversations across India and Pakistan especially, but also into Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And I think, so this book, it's called, it focuses on Muslim South Asia, and the title is very specific because we really wanted it to kind of reach beyond the boundaries of India specifically. So I think that the pandemic opened up that opportunity, that chance to kind of have these conversations about food across borders. It also enabled us to think about sort of different ways of sharing the stories that we were gathering. So obviously, we share them as the written word. We put together this amazing collection of short pieces and recipes. But we also, so one of the features of the book is there's quite a lot of QR codes, particularly at the end of the preface, which lead to other parts of the project, which were more digitally oriented. So I noticed there was a question in the chat, which was about a documentary. And as part of this project, we did record quite a lot of oral interviews using film, and then those were woven into a particular documentary called Dastarkhan-e Rampur, which was particularly about the food cultures of a former princely state in the north of India called Rampur. So yes, the answer to that the question in the chat is that yes, there is a documentary. And all of the material that we recorded as film is available through the University of Sheffield's Sheffield Player. So please do, if you're interested to follow up on this session, please do have a look at that. There is the documentary there, but lots of other interviews as well. And then another thing was one of the early pieces in the scroll column. One of our historians who was a postdoc in Germany, Dr. Razak Khan, he was really keen to work with performers. And I guess one thing that really came home to us in the context of the pandemic was that a lot of the people and groups that we were working with, they had lost their livelihood, right? Sadaf was talking about street vendors, and suddenly, the streets closed, and those kind of opportunities for daily survival disappeared overnight. Similarly, many of the performers that we were working with, they also lost their livelihoods. So it was kind of thinking about, okay, how can we support activities through food that will still enable this to kind of happen in the digital forum? So one really fun thing we did, to which there's a QR code in the book, was Razak worked with some performers, particularly some female storytellers or dastangoi in Delhi. And we used a historic text from the 19th century, which was full of food and food references and reflections. And they wove together a kind of contemporary storytelling piece. And all of those discussions happened online, and eventually we recorded it. And that was the topic of one of our scroll chapters, one of our scroll articles, and as I say, is also kind of woven into the book through these multimedia connections as well. So yeah, it made us think outside the box, it made us think creatively, and absolutely, as you said, it also really focused people's attention on food, I think. That was when people were in their homes all the time, it made people think much more consciously about that kind of that everyday food, I suppose. And as a historian, that's what I'm really interested in.
And Sadaf, what about you? Siobhan mentioned that you have a chapter in the book on street food. All of a sudden, the pandemic hits, and the street vendors have had to get off the streets and isolate, like so many of us. How did you navigate that chapter?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because after the book was done, I was also giving a TED talk on the same thing, on street food and why we need to respect street vendors and street food, because again, they sit at the lowest in the pyramid itself, and they are the first one to get kicked out oftentimes. And every time when I was going out, the funniest was to speak with people, to talk to them, just hear the story so that I can make my story richer and have more nuance. I was getting endless messages from people saying, "Hey, listen, Sadaf, can you stop going to the streets essentially, because this is where the COVID is and all that things." Um, I was being cautious for sure, and making sure where I'm going, where I'm not going. Um, but again, the idea was to bring out the stories, and so that's the first thing that my approach itself. Second approach was also to look at call the vendors directly, ask them what they are up to right now. And I'll tell you one of the fascinating stories that I came across. One guy who would sell otherwise biryani on the streets, by the way, in Old Delhi itself, and I called him up and asked him that what is he up to, and he says he's selling vegetables right now. And this guy has been doing biryani for like last 25, 30 years. And his biryani sells like hotcake. He opens up and it's gone in like 4, 5 hours. But because of pandemic, people were not buying from him, and he also has no online delivery mechanism. So the business really got the hurt. And then he thought, okay, in the meanwhile, what is that people are actually buying? And he figured out that vegetables is something that people are buying. So he changed the cart for a bit. He started selling vegetables only, and was again trying to make his ends meet. And then, of course, now he's back to selling biryani. So that's a great thing, because we have less of good biryani makers and more of vegetable sellers. So such kind of interesting stories came out. Then the second thing, which was also is how you pack and sell your food then, right? And because now you have to keep your surrounding very clean. So that in a way, what COVID also did was helped the street vendors clean up their space much better than they ever did, which invited people more into their areas, not house, but into their shops. And also they had their own ways of distancing people. So I remember again one of the Nihari shops is always jam packed. There was barely space for 10 people to sit comfortably, and you will have 20 people there. So what he started doing was just having 5, 6 people in one round, and then serve them, send them back, bring more people, send them. So that was an interesting way of just still being in business, serving people what they have been doing. These are the shops which just sells Nahari, for example, right, and nothing else. And how do you continue doing it? Of course, business will get hurt, but still, how do you just keep at it? Now, of course, business has gone back to where it was, but I think these were interesting, fascinating anecdotes that I learned from these street vendors and what they are up to. That resilience, basically. If you look at street vendors and the street food to me is the example of struggle, is an example of resilience. You pick up any of these things, it's just an example of resilience. That how do they sell it? How do they market it? How does this food goes to an next person? Because also there's so much of negativity around street food itself. So yeah, they fight this every now and then. Unlike the bigger corporate restaurants who have PR machinery with them, with these guys there was nothing. So yeah.
I love this example that Sadaf just gave us. It really kind of, as he said, points to the flexibility and resilience of these street providers. And I think, that, I think it's just a lovely thing to capture through a book like this.
Then are having to compete with the people. But at the moment of the day,
You're breaking up again, Shamim.
You hear now?
Yeah. No.
What I said about.
No, there seems to be some kind of problem.
Oh.
You're breaking up. Maybe in the meantime we can go over. We've got a couple of questions again in the chat. You're still breaking up.
Maybe can I just take a minute actually, just to say I was thinking too, as Sadaf was speaking, about some of the other ways that the pandemic shaped this book. And I guess one of the things was, we were talking about, we've talked about street vending and how that was a kind of practice that obviously was so interrupted as a result of the pandemic. But obviously, lots of activities that people did with their families and extended families were also interrupted too. So some of the early columns that we had were focusing on kind of rituals within families. So one of our authors, Farah Yamin, writes about Bakar Eid, the Eid al-Adha, in her home in Bihar, and how at a time when those rituals were interrupted and couldn't happen in the way that they had before, it seemed like a real moment to try and remember and capture those processes of exchange and sharing. So there was a real kind of focus in some of those columns on that kind of things that had been interrupted and which people wanted to remember. We also used some of the early columns to give what we call kind of food warriors, people who are interested in survival and revival of food practices, a chance to talk about the activities that they undertook that had been cancelled as a result of the pandemic. So again, one of our early columns was on a festival called the Mahindra Sanatkada Festival in Lucknow. And we asked a contributor, Noor Khan, who was very involved in arranging that festival, and particularly the Sunday food festival element of it. So she wrote about the Sunday food festival and how it had happened and developed over a number of years in February 2021 when it had been cancelled. So in a way, the column and the chapter for the book became a memory of what had been at least temporarily lost at that time. So yeah, that's just some other ways maybe the pandemic had influenced. Shamim, are you back with us?
I hope so.
Yes.
So. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, great. Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, this is such a fascinating subject, and I could keep asking both of you questions for hours on end. But unfortunately, time is limited, and we have around 15 minutes or so before we move on to the questions from the audience, which I do want to get to because I can see from the chat that some of the questions are quite wonderful. But before we do that, Siobhan and Sadaf, starting with Siobhan, I do want to ask you both about the collaboration process. Now, Siobhan, you're a historian, Sadaf, you're a practitioner. And as we have said before, this is what makes this book unique. It seems to work really, really well. Siobhan, what would you say each of you brings to the table? And what are the benefits and challenges of the collaboration process?
Thanks for that question, Shamim. I'm really glad you did ask that because it was one of the reasons I hoped that Sadaf could join me today, because I think it's been such a fruitful and actually exciting process to work together as a chef and a historian. And I should say that when so Sadaf didn't mention this before when you asked how he got involved in the project, but I contacted him completely out of the blue. And I was just absolutely delighted when he was so open to me kind of contacting him randomly, off an email address I got off his website or something like that. I contacted him because he was already had an interest in kind of engaging with history and engaging with heritage recipes. And I guess I was feeling that as historians, and I talk about this actually in the introduction to the book, there's all this chatter around heritage food in India today, but in lots of other places as well. And I guess what I felt as a historian was this was all really interesting, and it was really fascinating how it was in the kind of public domain, and that so many people were interested in engaging with heritage food. But at the same time, it felt very kind of surface layer to me. As a historian, I knew there was this like vast quantity of one of the things I work with most actually as a historian at the moment is historic recipe collections and cookbooks. And I've been working with these amazing selection of cookbooks in Urdu, particularly from the late 19th and early 20th century. And I was thinking, if they really want to engage with heritage food, look at all these sources that we can unearth as professional historians. I guess too, I was thinking, very often when there's this kind of more surface engagement with heritage food, it misses the historical context. It misses kind of seeing what those recipes meant at the time they were first written down, the first prepared, perhaps. So I felt that kind of contextualizing around a recipe was something that we could bring. And also, as a professionally trained historian, we have a kind of obsession with accuracy and trying to, really pinpoint the processes and the moments in which changes happened with cuisine, with recipes. So kind of thinking about that sort of historical process. I felt that was something that we could kind of bring to the table. At the same time, pardon me, I'm snuffling again. It's been an amazing process working with a chef like Sadaf, because actually he has so much knowledge, which is kind of tacit knowledge in a way, which is inherited from chef to chef to chef, which even I'm a kind of passable home cook, but is a bit lost on me. So in some ways, as a historian, I work with these historic recipes, but they're quite impenetrable to some degree. It's really hard to understand them unless you watch the process in which they're being cooked, and you see, you do some of that kind of experiential, experimental cooking, and understand the processes and ingredients. And it's only through doing that I began to see, how ingredients and processes had changed, what these recipes told us about labor, particularly labor in the kitchen, what they revealed to us about social organization, what they revealed to us about technologies. So I think, bringing together those two types of knowledge and kind of bringing them together really enabled us to kind of enrich our understanding both of food history, but also heritage history, heritage food in the present as well. And maybe just a final point I'll say is certainly working with Sadaf has enabled us to kind of bring history, and particularly food history, to a much wider audience. Sadaf and I have done some really fun events together where Sadaf has been cooking and doing storytelling and feeding people. And I can certainly say that people are much more open to hear about history when food is on offer as well. So that is certainly another benefit.
Is that something you would agree with, Sadaf? I'm really interested to hear about your take on the collaboration process.
No, absolutely. I will start with last thing first. I remember the last Eid, essentially. I did this one event where I was cooking food from the 15th to the 19th century. And the most fascinating part of the entire event, was that people were so open to accept the flavors. And as Siobhan mentioned, that as historians, we want to have what was cooked, right? And I always say the food is like a living museum. When you walk into a museum, it's a dead museum. In that sense, you can't really go back in time. But with food, it has the power of sending you back in time to tell you that, at some point when there was no spices in your food, what were you really having? So one of the questions about spice blends as well in the question itself, that kind of thing which sort of answers it, that okay, if there were only 4 spices in total, then how the food tasted, right? Versus now, I feel like we are much more richer now than we were, Mughals or the 15th century or the 13th century people ever were, because we have more spices in general. And that's what I think gives a chef and a history person, if the historians and chef comes together, because it sort of ties up very wonderfully, right? for somebody who's excited about food, trying different kinds of food, what people were having, what they might have in future, we don't know. To understand from a document perspective that this is what they were having. The chefs have a limitation in that sense. Historians have another limitation in that sense. But they're both limitations can come together to give you this beautiful, wonderful dish. They can also experiment with it, right? Saying, okay, this is not working. How do we experiment? Keeping the soul of the food still the same, keeping everything same, but just changing the technique because X technique is not working in this condition, in the current space and time. So how do you figure that out? I think that's where both the knowledge comes in together. Um, I would tell you, last year again, there was one person I know, she was doing food where she was putting edible camphor in food. Edible camphor was quite a thing. Many Mughal documents talk about that how they have put camphors, how they have put sandalwood to give food a really nice perfume and aroma. But now we don't eat edible camphor. If you eat it, you will not feel good about your own stomach and you may have uneasiness. And I remember when she served food with edible camphor, 15 people came for that particular event one night, and seven reported back saying they're not feeling well. So how do you then figure that out? How do you sort of maneuver your way around? And that's where I think both the practitioners in that sense, the history practitioners, the food practitioners, they bring the knowledge together. Um, I think it's a beautiful part. And second is again going back to what Siobhan mentioned, it was really yeah I now I go back in time. It was just a very out of the, and I used to run a blog back then, and then one fine day an email hit my inbox, and Shubham attended one of the events that I was conducting in Old Delhi itself, and that's where we started sort of this entire interaction. So it's interesting to see how these smaller little pocket events, and you have all sorts of people who are interested in understanding what the food people were having back in the days. Because right now, I feel as a chef, um, we have templates of the food, right? That every food has a set template. A butter chicken would taste by and large the same because it's getting cooked almost the same way. Whereas a dish which was cooked back in the days was not in the same template. Everything was supposed to be different, taste different. And how do you sort of, work your way around? So yeah, people are interested in history. People are interested in eating history or putting history on a plate. If I can take that liberty.
We are, time is speeding along, but there's a couple of questions that I do want to ask you before we move to the questions. So, because we haven't spoken about your various chapters. So, starting with Siobhan, if you could, as succinctly as you can, tell us about the chapter that you have in section 2 of the book. It's entitled "You Are What You Eat," and my understanding of it is, and do correct me if I'm wrong, that you challenge the narrative that the way one eats becomes a fundamental marker of difference between different communities in contemporary India. If you could, as succinctly as you can, just tell us a little bit about that chapter.
Thanks for that question, Shamim. I will certainly tell you about that chapter, but can I just say one thing very quickly in response to Sadaf's answer? I was just, there was 2 points he made about, one was about spices and the fact that, older recipes have fewer spices and now we have a kind of much richer palate. But for me as a historian, what's revealing about that is that actually it shows how ingredients and produce has changed over that time. So certainly, when we look at some of the 19th century recipes, they do seem very light in flavor to us now. And we long for them to have a greater spice and we long for them to have a bit more heat to them, perhaps. In line with our kind of contemporary palate. But it probably suggests to us that, this is a time before things like the Green Revolution, for instance, in India, which changed the nature of how rice and wheat and fruit and vegetables were prepared. And so it suggests to us that actually we can see how the taste of our food of the actual ingredients has perhaps degraded over the period that we're looking at. So again, I wanted to take that up because I think it gives us a sense of kind of this idea of historical change. And it's not just in terms of of the recipes, it's also in terms of agriculture and these kind of bigger processes in society. Now, I was supposed to be succinct about my about my chapter, and I've already gone off on a tangent. Forgive me that.
Fine.
Yeah, my own contribution to the kind of body of the book is, as you said, a chapter called "You Are What You Eat." It's part of the second section of the book, which is called "Identities in Flux." And that part of the book is really meant to kind of highlight just what Sadaf and I have just been talking about, the idea of how food is evolving and changing, but also how that suggests kind of broader transformations, if you like, within society, particularly in terms of a sense of identity and belonging. So my own chapter is a quite it's a very purposeful response, I suppose, to India's contemporary food politics, where what we see too often, at least at the level of high politics, is that food is used to divide and marginalize rather than bring people together in the way Sadaf was speaking about before. And I guess it's kind of the historian's revenge, if you like, to suggest that actually the way things are now is not the way it's always been. That yes, this is how food is being used in contemporary India, but it's not always been this way. And so in my chapter, which I must say is actually a kind of, I hope, shorter and more accessible version of an academic paper that I did for Global Food History, I talk about how identities and how those are expressed through food have varied basically by nation, by community, by cultural groups over time. So I have 4 sections in the chapter in which I talk about how food wasn't, and actually very rarely was, about dividing Hindu from Muslim. Rather, it was much more about articulating other senses of identity and difference and belonging. It was about maybe distinguishing between colonizer and colonized, about distinguishing between men and women, about distinguishing between different social classes, and also of distinguishing between Muslims of different regions and locales. And I do want to point this out because I think it's quite a poignant point, especially at this point in Ramzan. I open the chapter by talking about a boy called Junaid Khan, who was stabbed to death on a train in June 2017 in a religiously motivated attack, which was what are sometimes called beef lynchings in India itself. And I wanted to show that there was another history than the history that he lived. And the chapter finishes with a recipe for soya bean biryani, which was his favorite food, which he always asked his mother to cook for him in Ramzan, just to suggest that there is and can be an alternative history to the kind of division that we necessarily see around food in India at the political level today.
Well, Siobhan, I found the opening of the chapter very, very powerful. It's a very moving chapter and a very informative one as well. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I want to encourage people who are joining this session to buy the book and read it. And all I will say is you won't be disappointed. Now, Sadaf, you have 2 chapters in the book, Ode to Street Vendors and Bihari Kebabs and Other Stories, both of which you described with such richness and affection. I was really drawn into them, and your love, your passion really comes through in your exquisite writing. Why did you choose those topics? And again, I'm very gently reminding you, I would love to speak to you for hours on end, but unfortunately time is not on our side. So if you could be as succinct as possible, that would be wonderful.
Less words is not my forte. I personally enjoy writing or narrating about things which people don't necessarily talk about. It's there, but people ignore it. Now, Bihari Kebab is one of those things. The only 2 places Bihari Kebabs was, when I was writing, popular was Bihar, of course, because comes from Bihar, and all the way to Karachi. Because when post-partition, when the Bihari migrated from Bihar to Dhaka, and then from Dhaka to Karachi, they took the kebab with them. It's a similar kind of kebab which is popular in Lucknow called pasande kebab. Now, I think all the kebabs are here and Bihari kebab is here because of the way it's made. It's chunky, it's thinly sliced, which is called the pasanda cut, or in English it would be called the ceviche cut thin sliced meat. And then that gets marinated in bunch of spices, including papaya, which works as tenderizer. So it's really soft and melt in your mouth, and yet it has the body of it. So it's as it is the pasanda, it's a thin cut of it. I think people don't talk about it now. I'm surprised in Delhi so many people are talking about it. And I was the last time I was telling as well, when we did the launch of the book, Forgotten Foods, and I had to use an AI generated image, to be honest. I sort of showed an AI generated image saying this is the Bihari kebab. But now there's enough and more on internet. You don't have only one kind of. And second, by the time I was done talking about Bihari kebab, there's one vegetarian who came to me and said, Sadaf, you overhyped the kebab so much that I just had to try it out. So I take full. So this person went out and tried Bihari kebab and comes to me and says, I loved it. I just had to try it out and I loved the kebab. And that's why I love this talking about Bihari kebab, serving Bihari kebab. Every time I do pop up, I would serve it. Second, about street food. Again, the same thing that I think people neglect such kind of things, and it is important. It is important for us to be able to talk about things which we see on a daily basis. One thing I think this project silently did to me, and of course, all thanks to Siobhan as well, is making me think beyond obvious as well. So yes, what you're seeing is great, but can you think it from a historical perspective? Can you think it from the anthropological lens? And that's where I started narrating a better story, I feel. Yeah, that's as small as it can be.
Great. Right. We are 7 minutes into our audience Q&A session. Very, very, very last question from me. One sentence responses would be amazing if you could do that. I understand that you are working on another project together. Siobhan, would you like to tell me what that's about?
Yeah, it was just Sadaf and I have recently been invited to participate in a project which is coming out of the University of Virginia, I believe, and I think maybe we have some of those people in the audience with us today, so welcome to them. They're doing a project on chefs doing history, and it'll give us an opportunity to kind of reflect more consciously, I suppose, on the joys, the benefits, the challenges of working between a historian and a chef. Otherwise, we have continuing outputs from the project as a whole. So I'm working, unfortunately, not with Sadaf so much on this one, but I'm working with one of the other contributors to the book, Farah Yamin, on a graphic book on which looks at Muslim eating practices in contemporary India. And then Sadaf has been involved in this one. Also, we're working on a historic cookbook on Rampur cuisine from the specific place I noted in North India. And Sadaf was part of that project in trialing some of the recipes and contributing to the stories behind them as well. So those are three outputs actually that are still to come.
Right, and Sadaf, last word from you on future projects. How are you feeling about them?
Almost the same thing, 3 projects apart from what one Siobhan already mentioned about. I am doing one oral history project on food, which talks about partition, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh in that sense. Second one I'm looking at is Lucknow from a gendered lens. So it will be home cooked food or home cooks beyond the Nawabs, and not just Muslim cuisine, but Muslims, Hindus, Jews, Anglo-Indians, anybody who migrated to Lucknow. And the third one, which I'm also excited about, is to document the food and practices of tribals in Jharkhand. Again, something that people have not documented. You'll be surprised. Nobody has ever documented the tribal food in Jharkhand. And so I am picking that up as well. And these are 3 things that I'm currently working on.
Oh, I can't wait to find out more about your future projects. And both of you, again, are doing such a great service to history, to culture, and to bringing people together through food. So a great service both of you are doing. Now, I am delighted to say that we've got a fantastic response on the chat. We've got 20 minutes, just slightly under, to go through as many as we possibly can. Now, in case we can't, a lot of people are asking some really interesting questions, follow-up questions on the subjects that we've been discussing today. Would it be okay, Siobhan and Sadaf, if would you be able to put your email address or a contact in the chat if people want to reach out to you directly if we can't get through the questions? Is that something, well, I'll put you up now.
Just to say, I'm super
just
easy to find online because I'm an academic. So if you just look up my name, then you will find out my email address and contact details. For some reason, the chat won't let me comment on directly into the chat. But yeah, if anyone's got any questions or want to get in touch with me, please don't hesitate to write.
And what about yourself, Sadaf? What would be the best way for people to contact you? Because I'm getting a lot of interest in your work.
I'm available everywhere, all the social media possible. It's easy. Sadaf Hussain, the email I have already put in. Another reason why it's easy to find me because I am the only Sadaf Hussain male.
Okay. Yeah.
You have
yeah.
mostly Sadaf Hussain female.
Yeah. So there you go, everyone joining us from all around the world. If I can't get through to answering all the questions, then it should be very, very easy for you to find both Sadaf and Siobhan online. Let's do some quick hellos. Hasmib from Lancashire has been very active on chat, and she says hello back to you, Tasnib. Donna Agmon says good morning from Virginia in the US. Priya Dafinka is in Brighton and Hove in the UK. Marsha is a project manager in education and is saying good morning from Milton Keynes in the UK. Fiber is in Surrey. Iwan S, assalamu alaikum from Jakarta, all the way in Indonesia. Agnes is in West London. Dun Daji is in Stockport. And we have many. Dixon is from Uganda. We have someone from Uganda here. It is fantastic that we have such a diverse audience. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for listening in today. Ben said, Siobhan, this is an amazing story behind the fascinating book. Marsha is asking, any plans for a documentary film? Is that something? I'll put that to Sadaf. Sorry, I'll put that to Siobhan, I should say. Any plans to turn this into a documentary?
Yeah, just as I noted before, we did do some, we worked with a filmmaker to do some recording in the course of the project, and all of that material is available on the Sheffield Player, including a documentary which is looking particularly at the evolving food cultures of Rampur in North India. So please do take a look after this session.
Tasnim is saying, hello, I've joined for the first time. Where can I get these books and can you send us a list? Well, as I mentioned, it's published by Macmillan India in 2003, and a very brief search on the title, it will pop up. So it should be, it shouldn't be too difficult to get hold of at all.
2023.
Yes.
Not 2003.
What did I say? What did I say?
2003, but that's fine.
I'm only 20 years out. 2023. Yeah. Also, a reminder that this session will be online, so you'll be able to see it. I think in a day or so. I'm not quite sure how long it's going to take, but the entire session will be online. So at the beginning, I do mention the full title and publication and all the information that you need. So if you listen on that, then hopefully if you've missed anything, you'll be able to pick it up. Zainab is saying, I'm doing my undergraduate anthropology dissertation on packaged mixed masalas. That's brilliant. And this book, I use those, by the way. Sham is very handy to use. And this book fits so perfectly into it. So I'm looking forward to picking up a copy. Great. I think you'll find it really, really useful, Zainab.
Can I jump in there, Shamim?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Please jump in whenever you feel it.
I'm sure Sadaf and I both have lots of things to say about packet masalas.
Oh God!
I mean,
should I have admitted that I use them now?
no. I was just going to say, Zanab, it would be lovely to speak to you more about your project. One aspect of the bigger Forgotten Food project was that we did a lot of oral history in Delhi with different groups. And one of the things that we looked at was the shift in kind of the technologies of food and how that was impacting what people were using in their house, including bought spice mixes. So it would be, I'm sure we'd have lots to discuss. And of course, Sadaf, you're the master of spice mixes. So yeah, I'd love to hear what you've got to say here too.
Yeah, Sadaf, I'm really curious. What's your take? You can be as honest as you like. Because I know like Shan and others are really quite popular, and they're quite, they really help people out who've got busy lifestyles and they want to, put something together. What are your thoughts on masala mixes? So Sadaf seems to have frozen.
I have a book called Masala Mandi. I have a book called Masala Mandi, which is a fat ass book. So if you're interested in spice blends of current and old times, feel free to pick it up. I think it's available across the world. You may have to pay a little extra, less, depending on where you are from. I am personally someone who loves to tell people that if it's biryani masala, why can't you put the same masala in your scrambled eggs? Because somebody came up with the fact that, oh, these spices taste so good in biryani. But then have you tried it beyond that? I remember once I was working with a masala company in Delhi itself. And to my surprise, this was a Jain lady. This was a vegetarian community, essentially. And then she came to me and she said, we don't want to make meat masalas or the korma masala. And I said, why? And then she says, because, it's for meat. And I said, yeah, but it doesn't have meat. And she was surprised to hear this for the first time, that the spices which says meat masala doesn't have meat in it. And I said, yeah, duh. If it says meat masala, it's not that it has meat in it. It goes in the meat itself. So she was surprised with the fact. So that's an interesting anecdote. And I feel there are so many stories, and I was right now serving people different kind of chaat masala, which is this seasoning, and how different different parts within Delhi itself had different kinds of seasoning called chaat masala. So it's a
Oh, you seem to have frozen
spices.
for a second. Hopefully he'll. Wow, there you go. Yes. So what I took from that is that just because a spice blend is set out for something else, you don't necessarily have to stick to that, and be experimental. It might be in a packet, but you can still be experimental. A question from Nada to Siobhan and Sadaf. This is amazing to share. We appreciate. Has working on this book changed the way you cook or think about food in your daily life? Has it altered your relationship with memory, heritage, or even your own kitchen practices? Siobhan?
That's a great question. Thank you for that, Nada. It certainly has changed things for me. It's made me much more conscious of those hidden things that Sadaf was mentioning before. But one thing particularly, I would say is and I've kind of indicated this by talking before about ingredients, it's made me think a lot about the building blocks of the food that we use in the kitchen. The rice, the vegetables, the meats, where those come from, and how that contributes to the flavor of food. So another aspect of the Forgotten Food Project was that I mentioned before that we worked with plant scientists, and we did that because actually what we found when we went to many of the heritage recipes was that they were relied on ingredients, or types of ingredients, I should say, that are no longer available. So many of the historic recipes would specify particular varieties of rice, for instance, that were appropriate to use for different recipes. And now, of course, what do we get? We mostly get standard basmati. hybrid form of basmati that is grown mostly across most areas of India. Of course, there are pockets where other types of rice are being grown, but if you're going to your local supermarket or whatever, that was, pardon me, that's what you'd mostly get. And then as part of the project, we worked with a local farmer in North India, and we grew some of these heritage rice varieties. And Sadaf can definitely attest to this. One of the fascinating things about these rice varieties is they had, one, a very different texture, but also, and very dramatically, a very different smell. And as Sadaf was talking about before, this really impacted your whole kind of engagement with the food, and also, and this goes to one of the other questions, your kind of affective engagement with the food as well. It brought out kind of a different sense and emotion, I suppose, in relation to what you were eating. So yeah, it's made me much more conscious of thinking about ingredients, making sure I can get particular ingredients, and indeed the very best quality ingredients that I can to make the dishes that I do in my own kitchen.
What about you, Sadaf? Has working on the book changed the way? I mean, you've been cooking for so long. You're an expert chef. You've been on MasterChef. But has the book in any way changed how you think about food in your daily life? Has it had any kind of impact on you in that sense? And also, I love this part of the question where Nada asks, has it altered your relationship, memory, and heritage, and even your own kitchen practices? Have we lost Sadaf? I'm not sure. Maybe there's a bit of a delay.
Keep losing Sadaf, I think.
Are you there? Let's give it a few seconds. Well, let's move on to the next question, and then hopefully by then Sadaf will be able to join us again. Hopefully it's just a temporary glitch. Now, Adam is asking, have you found ways in which traditional foods may either have, this is a great question, have either changed or remained the same with migration and diaspora, Siobhan?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I've just given some ideas about how kind of traditional foods perhaps have changed as a result of like production processes, of agricultural processes. But you asked specifically about migration and diaspora. In the book, we have some nice chapters actually, which look at kind of food in diaspora. And one of the ones that I'm thinking of just now is a chapter by Razak Khan, who I mentioned before, who talks about Afghan foodways in Germany. And as part of that chapter, he has some conversations with Afghan migrants and also friends as well who happen to come from that community. And they reflect very consciously, and this kind of goes back to the last question a little bit too, they reflect very consciously on how food captures the memories and the feelings of places left behind, but also, of course, captures the place to which it goes. So this idea of kind of constant evolution, and I guess that's a big thing that comes out in the book as a whole. You know, people often talk about the authentic in food, and that's a term that really kind of bridles with us as historians, because we're obsessed with how things are changing and evolving all the time. And the idea of the authentic suggests that a food is kind of fixed to a particular place or a particular time. It really, I think, especially when you look at migration, when you look at the diaspora, but also when you look at other food cultures, you get a sense of how food is not fixed, how it is always evolving. And I think Sadaf pointed to this earlier as well, when he was sort of saying, you know, what we eat now is not the same as we ate in the past, and it won't be the same as we eat in the future either. I think, kind of going to the heart of your question about migration and diaspora, we see the way in which these are communities that are holding on to foodways and using food as a way to foster a sense of identity and belonging and solidarity as well within that community. But it's also a way that food is forced change, basically. And I think that's one of the things that comes out quite strongly through the book, is that actually the borders of a region, for instance, are very much in flux, and it's through that kind of influx of people and movement of people that we see cuisines always evolving and changing.
So I'm so glad you could join us again. I think this is unfortunately this is the nature of technology. I just want to go back to the questions that I had asked both of you. That I think it was Nada who had asked the question. Just give me 1 second. Let me just try and find it again. Yes. So very, very briefly, because we literally have just a couple of minutes left of this session, sadly. Has working on this book in any way changed how you think about food in your daily life? Has it altered your relationship with memory and heritage?
Similar to Siobhan, I think now I see food from a very different lens, I think, which is understanding the soul, the different components of the food itself. And one of the different components, I'm not only talking about ingredients, it's the technique, it's the people who are making it, it's where you're making it. To understand everything is to understand the food better, is to be able to find the romance in the food, and also with that romance to find the magic in the food, not logic. Oftentimes there is no logic in food. You're just eating it because you just want it, and that comes out through the romance. That comes out through understanding of the food. It changes over the time, but the romance, as the definition of romance itself, keeps on changing from last year to now to next year, right? And it will keep on changing. And on that, I just want to also segue to what Siobhan was right now talking about the authenticity. And that's what I want to talk about from the chef's perspective, that how there is nothing called authentic food. Even if the people you think that cooking authentic food, it's not. For one main reason, again, that food is fluid, right? What I cooked yesterday versus what I'm cooking right now are not authentic, because the temperature of the day itself have changed, the flame itself have changed, maybe the pots and pans have changed, maybe the produce have changed. So nothing is authentic in that sense. What you should look for is the way of cooking it, is the basic structure. So a biryani's basic structure would be XYZ. A kebab's basic structure would be ABC. If that's the basic structure you're following, then that can be considered as a dish that you know of. So just that's the only thing you can be authentic about. But as Siobhan mentioned, that this is fluid. Food, language, culture, society keeps on changing, keeps on evolving itself. So saying that this is what my forefathers have eaten and that's what I want to eat, not necessarily possible. To hold on to that, what is authentic and what is not. I feel like if it's a great food, enjoy that with the same name or a different name that you may have given it, but just enjoy that instead of getting into that fix whether is this authentic or not.
That is a beautiful thought to leave the session on, the romance of food. I think that's how you described it, and I think that's a lovely note. So sadly, we have come to the end of our session. My apologies to all of you who have put questions and comments on the chat. Unfortunately, we haven't had time to get to all of them. But as I mentioned, you can directly get in touch with Sadat and Siobhan if you have any questions at all. So let me remind you of the book again, Forgotten Foods, Memories and Recipes from Muslim South Asia. You can find it online and in major bookstores. This session, as I said, will be available on YouTube, so feel free to rewatch it and share it with friends, colleagues and family. Massive thank you to Sadat and Siobhan. It has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and we can't wait to hear about your next project. Thank you also to the incredible MACFEST team, especially CEO Kaisar Shiraz, Katarzyna, and of course you, the audience. Your participation is what makes these events so successful. Quick reminder, the festival runs until July. Please visit www.macfest.com and you'll find a whole range of very, very exciting events. Thank you once again for joining us. Assalamu alaikum and goodbye to you all wherever you are in the world.
Shamim, thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Today. It was lovely to have you. Thank you to our guests. It's actually macfest.org.uk. Please visit our website. When you scroll down, there is an icon to click on to get to YouTube, so you can, in the next few days, you will be able to watch this webinar again. I'm really sorry, I don't think we picked up all the questions, but do feel free to contact our hosts, especially the person who is writing the dissertation. Now, do join us for our upcoming events. We are starting the Women's Festival very soon. Watch out for the Blind Chef event. It's an inspirational figure.
Yes, you have two other amazing events coming up, celebrating International Women Week. One is a live event on 4th of March, which is at the University of Manchester, hosted by the University Creative Manchester, and it'll be great. And there'll be a buffet as well, and people can take away food, obviously, if they're fasting. And then, of course, we're celebrating International Women's Day, Muslim women in the media. It's going to be absolutely terrific. So now I want to thank personally Shamim, Siobhan, and Sada for an amazing conversation. It really has been riveting. I mean, I belong to the Asian background, so I can relate to all of it, and I loved every bit of it. But I'm sure people who don't belong to that background also learned a lot, enjoyed a lot. And as usual, Shamim, you've been terrific host. There's no word for it. And Siobhan, my goodness, this is your 3rd or 4th year with us. Loved hosting you again. Thank you so much. Sadaf from joining us all the way from India. And thank you to my team as well, Katazine and Steve in the background, and our student placement who are here as well, Adam, Sophia, and Carol. So everybody enjoy your afternoon, and goodbye from us. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and Ramadan Kareem from me.